Welcome back to After Dark. I am your host, Laura, and we're going to pick up right where we left off last week. It was the evening of June 15th, and Casey and her mom had gotten to a heated argument. Cindy actually put her hands around Casey's neck and choked her. She found pictures of Casey at clubs when she was supposed to be at work, and she and George had been watching Caylee for her. She told Casey she wouldn't watch Caylee anymore while she was out partying, and that Casey was an unfit mother. She told Casey she wanted her out of the house, but that she wasn't going to take little Caylee with her. However, Cindy denies that this fight ever happened. She wants to paint a picture of the perfect family. Lee, Casey's brother, witnessed the fight, and Casey's friends said Casey had told them about it. The neighbors also said they heard yelling that evening coming from the Anthony home. This brings us to the morning of June 16th, 2008, the last day anyone saw little Caylee alive. According to court documents, Casey was up checking her MySpace account between 7 and 9 a.m. From 7:56 a.m. until 8:06 a.m., Casey was talking to a friend named Ryan online. At 10 a.m., she was back on the computer uploading pictures of the inside of Fusion nightclub. She then was on Victoria's Secret and Frederick of Hollywood sites looking for outfits for the shot girls at the clubs to wear. According to Casey, she had been helping Tony with his club promotion business. At 11:47 a.m. that morning, she received a call from Tony that lasted 20 minutes. At 12:50 p.m., George saw Casey and Caylee getting ready to leave the house. Caylee had on a pink shirt, jean shorts, sandals, and white sunglasses. Casey told her dad she had a work meeting to go to and that if she worked too late or if Caylee was already asleep, they would just stay at the nanny's house. Caylee went up to George before they left and said, "Pawpaw, I'm going to see Zanny." This gives me chills. We know that Zanny the nanny doesn't exist. So is this something that Casey told Caylee to say to George? If so, then Caylee was helping Casey set up the storyline of her own disappearance, and that is disgusting on Casey's part. However, George could have made this up also. We will probably never know the truth. As Casey walked to the car, she was texting Tony. George walked them out to the white Sunfire and buckled Caylee in. George waved goodbye to little Caylee, and she waved back and blew her grandpa a kiss. That would be the last time George Anthony ever saw his granddaughter. Where did Casey go when she left the house that day, since we know she doesn't really have a job to go to? Well, she never left the vicinity of the Anthony home that afternoon, according to cell phone tower pings. She most likely was just driving around waiting until George left for work around 2:30 so she could go back home. She made 3 phone calls that all pinged off the same tower as it would if she was at the Anthony home, so she had to still be in that neighborhood. At 1 p.m., she called Tony Lazzaro. They spoke for about 15 minutes. She then texted Jesse Grund at 1:26 p.m. At 1:44 p.m., she called Amy Huizinga and talked to her for 36 minutes. Amy said they didn't talk about anything in particular. After this, there was a 30-minute gap in her phone activity. At 1:50 p.m., someone gets on the computer at the Anthony's home and does some internet searches. Someone had searched for foolproof suffocation. They spelled full Fool instead of Full. And George Anthony was known to be a bad speller. They then clicked on a link that took them to an article called Venturing into the Pro-Suicide Pit and then a blog about suicide. The searches were done from an AOL Instant Messenger account. George has an AOL account. Casey does not. She used Facebook Messenger and MySpace. This is also done an hour after George said Casey left the residence. It is speculated that George was feeling guilty about something and was planning a suicide attempt. At 2:52 p.m., Jesse Grun called Casey. Casey then told him about the fight she and her mom had gotten into the night before. She told him Amy was no longer moving in with her because her mom wanted her out of the house. He said it sounded like she was in her car driving, and he is sure that he heard Caylee's voice in the background babbling. He said he even heard Casey talking to Caylee. So Caylee was most likely still with Casey at this point. At 3:03 p.m., George called Casey while she was on the phone with Jesse. She didn't answer the call. He knew Casey was supposedly at a work meeting, so why would he be calling her right after he left the house, unless it was for something important? There is a theory as to what it was about, but we will get to that later. At 3:35 p.m., she called Tony, but he didn't answer. Casey left the house again a little after 4 p.m. It was then that she made quite a few phone calls. She first called George at 4:10 p.m. and then she made 4 calls to her mother back to back between 4:11 and 4:13 p.m. At 4:14 p.m., she called George again. At 4:18 p.m., she texted Tony and then called him at 4:19 p.m. At 4:21 p.m., she called Jesse Grun, but he didn't answer. Most people suspect between 3:30 and 4 o'clock is when something happened to Caylee, either an accident or not, and Casey was trying to find someone to help her and tell her what to do. There was definitely a sense of urgency in Casey's behavior, and it was only George's second day on the job, so I'm sure it wouldn't look good for him to have his daughter calling his job multiple times in a day unless there was a reason in an emergency. When no one would respond to her, Casey had to take things into her own hands. This is when her 31 days of lying, manipulating, and stealing started. At 4:19 p.m., Casey's phone started traveling away from the Anthony house and traveled north. At 4:25 p.m., it showed that she was in the vicinity of Cindy's work. What was so important that she needed to talk to her mom, especially after the fight they had the night before? At 5:57 p.m., Casey called Tony's apartment and headed that way. Her phone seemed to be shut off after she got to Tony's. Then it was turned back on around 6:30 p.m. She then called Cindy's cell phone at 6:31 p.m., but she got no answer, so she called her again at 6:32 p.m. Then right after that call, she calls the landline at the Anthony's house, which disconnected after 1 minute, so she most likely got the answering machine. At 7:06, she called the landline again and talked to her mom for about 2 minutes. Here is what Cindy says that call was about. Quote, I had gotten a phone call, God, I don't know what point in the evening, and she said she had a lot going on and that she wasn't going to come home. They were going to crash at Zanny's that night, and her and Caylee were just going to stay at Zanny's. End quote. Casey's phone is shut off again from 7:21 p.m. until 8:03 p.m. Next, Casey and Tony are seen on surveillance at a Blockbuster renting movies at 7:58 p.m. They rented Untraceable and Jumper. Caylee is not with her on the tape, which means whatever happened to her had already happened earlier that afternoon. They went back to Tony's and watched both movies, and then Casey spent the night and went to bed around 1 a.m., according to Tony's roommate. Casey's phone was shut off from 12:01 a.m. until 10:59 a.m. on the morning of the 17th. She most likely turned it on when she woke up in the morning. Around this time, she checked her voicemails and called Amy and talked for 8 minutes. Tony skipped his classes to hang out with Casey that morning. That afternoon, she told him she had to go to work when in reality, she went by her parents' house. From 11:30 a.m. until 2:12 p.m., Casey's phone was off once again. When she turned it on at 2:12 p.m., she called her father, George. That call lasted 3 minutes. At around 2:30 p.m., Casey arrived at the Anthony residence, and according to her neighbor, Brian Berner, she backed her car into the garage, which was not normal. Usually, she parked it outside and never backed it in. She left shortly after she arrived, Brian told the investigators. From 2:49 p.m. until 3:15 p.m., Casey's phone was once again turned off. She turned it on for a minute to post on Amy's Facebook wall. She said, quote, "Cheer me up, lady. I love you and I can't wait to finally get you moved in," end quote. Casey was still continuing this lie to Amy about her moving into the Anthony house, even though she had told other people it wasn't happening. I don't understand what she is getting out of this lie and why she is continuing it. At this point, she isn't even staying at her parents' home. From 3:15 p.m. until 5:20 p.m., Casey's phone is turned off and on several more times. I don't understand why she is turning her phone off so much, unless it's because she doesn't want to talk to her parents, or it could be she is thinking ahead and doesn't want all of her locations to be known. At 4 p.m., however, her phone was on and it pinged on a tower southwest of the Anthony house. The location of the ping was La Vista Boulevard and South Goldenrod. This was close to the spot where Caylee's body would eventually be discovered. An hour and 20 minutes later, Casey's phone pinged near Blanchard Park and Goldenrod, once again not far from where Caylee would be found months later. Casey visited a friend this afternoon from 4:25 p.m. until about 5:30 p.m. His name is Chris Stutz. They had dated off and on in the past. The last time he had seen Casey was around Mother's Day on May 17th at his parents' house. Casey and Caylee had spent the night that night. He said on June 17th, when she stopped by, there was no Caylee with her. He said this was weird because she would take Caylee everywhere. She also wasn't driving her Sunfire. She was driving Tony's Jeep Cherokee. She told Chris she was upset because her parents were divorcing and she needed a place to live. She told him her dad had an affair. She told Chris she was getting ready to buy a $250,000 house. Another lie of Casey's. She had no real job and no real income besides stealing from anybody and everybody. So there's no way she was able to buy any kind of house. There was no phone activity at all between 5:23 p.m. and 8:23 p.m. on the evening of the 17th. No texts, no pings, and no calls. At 8:23 p.m., her phone pinged at Tony Lazaro's apartment. Her phone continued to go off and on the rest of the evening. The next day, June 18th, at approximately 1:30 p.m., Casey's phone pinged near the Anthony's house once again. According to the neighbor, Brian Berner, Casey backed her car into the garage for a second time. Later, in a police interview, Brian tells officers that he was outside in his front yard. He had just mowed his grass and was blowing off the debris. He said Casey approached him and said that she couldn't find the key to their shed and wanted to know if he had a shovel that she could borrow to dig up a bamboo root in the backyard that she kept tripping over. Brian gave her the shovel, and then she walked back to her house and went in through the garage. She had the shovel for nearly an hour and brought it back around 2:30 p.m. Brian said she wasn't dirty or sweaty at all. Her phone pinged at the Anthony's house until 3:30 p.m. that day. Months later, after little Caylee was found and investigators were at the Anthony house, George approaches one of the investigators and tells him that he had located a freshly dug hole near the shed. The hole was 5 inches deep and 12 inches long. Could this be what Casey was doing with the shovel she borrowed from Brian? Investigators think it was. They think she started to bury Caylee in her own backyard, but either realized how stupid that was, or it was too much work for her. It would just be easier to throw her in the woods like a piece of trash. Casey told Cindy on this day that she was going to a convention for work at the Universal Orlando Hard Rock Hotel. She told Cindy she would be there till the 20th and that Zanny was watching Caylee for her. At this point, Caylee had not been seen in over 48 hours. On Thursday, June 19th, Casey contacted a friend of hers, Matthew Chris. They had gone to high school together and he was now a real estate agent. She told him Tony's lease was about up and he was looking to move. Matthew told her to have Tony come by his office, which he never did. But before getting off the phone with him, she invited him to Club Fusion that night. He said no. She also sent Troy Brown a Facebook message that day telling him that he should get some friends together and go to Club Fusion that night. Apparently, Casey was more worried about helping Tony with his club promoting and not worried about her missing daughter. On this day, she had told her mom that she had been sent to Busch Gardens in Tampa to help organize an event there at a hotel. She told her that Zanny had come with her to help with Caylee, along with Zanny's sister, Raquel Farrell. A lady she worked with, Juliette Lewis, was there with her little girl, Annabelle, also. She told her mom they were having a blast and not to worry. She said while she and Juliette worked, Zanny and Raquel watched the kids in the nearby park. They were having so much fun, they decided to stay through the weekend. Cindy asked about clothes, shoes, and toys for Caylee, and Casey said not to worry, and that Zanny always had extras and they had also been shopping. Cindy asked to talk to Caylee, but was always given a reason why she couldn't. The next night, Friday the 20th, Casey was messaging people to meet her at Fusion. She entered a hot body contest that night. She has been in Orlando this whole time. A photographer from the club remembered seeing Casey there. Here is what they had to say. Quote, "She seemed happy, as were most of the people there that night. I mean, as you can see from the photos, she seemed all right, having a good time, just like people our age would that night." End quote. On June 23rd, Casey and Caylee were supposed to leave Tampa and return to Orlando, according to Cindy. She asked Casey to stop by the house or have Caylee call her. Casey said she would. Casey and Tony actually stopped by the Anthony's house that day while George and Cindy were at work. Casey had run out of gas, so she and Tony broke into the Anthony shed with a tire iron and stole George's gas cans full of gas and filled her car with them. Cindy gets a call on the 23rd at 5:30 p.m. from Casey. She says Zanny had been in a terrible car accident as they were leaving Tampa and that she was sent to the hospital for a concussion. She said she sent Caylee back to the hotel with Juliette and Annabelle, and she stayed at Zanny's bedside. This girl, man, she has got problems. All of these people are fake. Her job is fake. This is crazy. It's even crazier her parents are believing it all. The next day, on the 24th, George goes out to mow his grass and discovers that his gas cans are gone. He called the Orlando Police Department to report a burglary. Casey called her mom that morning and said that Zanny was still in the hospital under observation, but that she was back in Orlando to grab some clothes and Zanny's insurance information. Casey came by later that day to get clothes. She told George that Caylee was fine and she was with Zanny, even though she had just told her mom Zanny was still in the hospital. What is wrong with these people? Casey then looked at George and said, quote, "It's a shame what happened in the shed." At that point, George started walking to Casey's car. She tried to stop him. She opened the trunk and threw the gas cans at his feet. Casey takes what she needs from people and doesn't care what anyone thinks or the consequences. At 3:12 p.m. that day, Jesse Grun called Casey. He said he heard Casey talking to Caylee, told her to get off the table and to be quiet. We know that Caylee was not with Casey. Whatever happened to her had already happened. Was she pretending to talk to her child to throw people off? By June 25th, George was starting to get worried as the days passed. He said he had never gone more than a night or two without seeing Caylee. He talked to Cindy, and she said she had been in contact with Casey and that everything was fine. He said, quote, I talked to Cindy about it. Because like I said, in Casey, we're extremely close and just concerned about, where she might be. And if I'm not mistaken, Cindy says, well, she's with a friend. She's been working a lot. I think she was thinking of doing some traveling or something like that. And I said, well, it would be nice to have, I used to refer to Caylee as our little girl. And I say, well, I wonder how our little girl is doing. God, I'd sure love to hear her voice. I haven't heard it for a week. On June 25th, Casey spoke to Amy on the phone. She told Amy about a horrible smell in her car. Said it seemed to be coming from the engine, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Later, Amy said in a statement, quote, she was like, I think maybe my dad ran something over with my car when he borrowed it. It smells like something died in my car, end quote. Even though we know that George has not had Casey's car, Casey has had Casey's car this whole time. If you were giving Casey the side eye right now, you probably are the only one besides me, because no one in Casey's circle seemed to pick up on what's going on. Casey tells them a story, which most of the time doesn't make sense, and everyone believes her. On Friday, June 27th, Casey told Cindy she was back in Orlando, but she was going to stay at the Hard Rock again to work on an event. Casey, man, I'll tell you, she's a hard worker. She told Amy that Caylee was at the beach with Zanny. And she told her mom that Caylee, Annabelle, Juliet, and Zanny were back in Orlando now, and Zanny was going to take Caylee to the beach. She told her mom also that Jeff Hopkins was in town, and she was going to spend time with him from the 27th through the 30th. Later that day, Casey's car ran out of gas again. Here is the text she sent to Amy. Quote, there was definitely part of a dead animal plastered to the frame of my car. My car ran out of gas again. 2 weeks in a row. On Friday, my stupid car runs out of gas. Wow. Casey's car ran out of gas right next to a dumpster in the parking lot of an Amscott Financial check cashing place on Goldenrod and Colonial Drive. Catherine Sanchez noticed the car there that day. She was an employee of the check cashing place. She noticed it was still there the next morning when she got to work, so she called the Orlando Police Department. They ran a check and said it hadn't been reported stolen. She called her boss and they said give it one more day and then to call a tow company. On Monday morning, June 30th, the car was still there, so the same employee called Johnson Tow Company. 2 hours later, Gary Ridgway came and got the car. I believe Casey ditched the car because Amy had already noticed the smell, and she didn't want anyone else to notice it and put two and two together. I think the placement of the car next to the dumpster was intentionally done to mask the odor coming from the car. That same day, Cindy called Casey and told her she was taking a week's vacation, and she wanted to spend time with Caylee. She hadn't seen her for weeks, and she missed her. Casey told her mom she didn't need her to babysit that week. She said that Zanny was still in the hospital, but her roommate, Jennifer Rosa, was going to be with Caylee at Universal all week. Here's what Cindy Anthony had to say about this. Quote, that was part of my frustration because I was off that week and I told her I could have watched Caylee. She said they were doing character breakfast and she was taking her around the park. And that was pretty much the whole week. And I don't remember specifics on Tuesday and Wednesday. I just know it's the same story every day. End quote. Also on June 30th, Tony, Casey's boyfriend, was going home to New York to visit family for a week. Casey gave him a ride to the airport in his own car, and since hers was out of gas, she drove his for that week that he was gone. As soon as she dropped Tony off at the airport, she drove straight over to Ricardo's house. She hung out with Amy, who was still staying on his couch, waiting until the day she could move in with Casey. Casey stayed at Ricardo's the whole week that Tony was gone. Amy remembers asking her where Caylee was, and Casey just said she had been so busy at work that she hadn't got to see her much. Amy and Casey also talked about a trip coming up that they, plus Ricardo and a few other people, were supposed to go on. They were going to Puerto Rico on the weekend of the 8th. Casey told Amy she had already gotten the time off approved at work. On July 1st, Ricardo woke up to Amy and Casey hanging out in the living room. He got ready and left for work, leaving them there. Amy thought Casey had to go to work, so Casey left the apartment around 10 a.m. She called her ex, Jesse Grunt, at 10:15 a.m. to see if she could come over to his house and take a shower before she went to work. She told him that Tony was out of town and that she didn't have a key to his place. She told him she couldn't go to her parents' house. At 10:39 a.m., she got to Jesse's house. Jesse expected Casey to have Caylee with her, but she didn't. Here is a statement from Jesse about that morning. Quote, she looked normal, cleaned up. She had a bag with her. It looked like it had clothes in it. And she went to take a shower. Left the door half open, went in, and took a shower in my bedroom. I stayed in the living room, played a video game, and watched TV. And then she came out and sat around until 12 o'clock watching television with me. End quote. Casey called Amy from Jesse's and said she had to work till 5 that night. She also told her she had been talking on the phone to her crazy mother. After Casey left Jesse's, she went to the nail salon at JCPenney's and got her nails done using her mother's credit card. So not only has she been stealing money from Ricardo and Amy, which we will get into later, she is stealing her mom's credit card and using it. On July 2nd, Casey was seen at Miller's Ale House with a group of guys. One of those guys was Brandon Snow. He was in the military and had been talking to Casey online. He was on leave and came to Florida to visit. While Casey was at the bar, her mom called her 8 times in a 24-minute period. Casey ignored the calls. I think Cindy was starting to realize something wasn't right. Casey went to a tattoo artist on the 3rd of July. I mean, who doesn't run out and get some new ink when their child is missing? No one. The answer is no one, unless your name is Casey Anthony. This tattoo she just had to have was on her left shoulder and said Bella Vita, which means beautiful life. What a beautiful life now that your daughter is gone. This girl has nerve. The tattoo artist, Bobby Williams, was someone Casey had known for around 7 years. He said Casey called a few days before and made the appointment. She had told him on the phone that Caylee would be with her when she came to the appointment. When she wasn't, she told Bobby she was with the nanny. He said Casey seemed really happy that day. She made an appointment for July 19th before she left. She promised to bring Caylee to the next appointment. However, she would never make it to that appointment because she would be in jail by then. Cindy had been off work on vacation for about a week, so this gave her plenty of time to think about what was going on. and she was really starting to worry about Caylee. She was constantly calling Casey, but not getting an answer. She just wanted to see her granddaughter. Casey finally answered her mom's phone call. She told Cindy she was at work and that Caylee was there also for an event for the children of Universal. Cindy had enough of Casey's excuses. She was going to see for herself that Caylee was okay. She got in her car and drove to Universal and into the employees' parking lot. She then called Casey and said she was outside and to bring Caylee out so she could see her. Casey said, "You just missed us." She said Jeff Hopkins had invited them to Jacksonville for the 4th of July at the last minute, and they were already in their car on the way there. Cindy no longer believed Casey. She asked Lee to help her find Casey and, most importantly, make sure Caylee was okay. Lee started with her MySpace to see if he could track her down. She told Cindy she was heading to Jacksonville, but her MySpace was telling them where she really was. Club Fusion. Lee headed to the club, but she got word that he was looking, so she left. He missed her by 1 minute. Lee even had his girlfriend call Casey. She answered for her, but as soon as Lee got on the phone, she hung up. On July 3rd, Cindy made a MySpace account and posted a message on her wall that was titled, "My Caylee is missing." She listed her mood as distraught. Here's what the message said. Quote, "She came into my life unexpectedly, just as she left me. This precious little angel from above gave me strength and unconditional love. Now she is gone and I don't know why. All I am guilty of is loving her and providing her a safe home. Jealousy has taken her away. Jealousy from the one person who should be thankful for all the love and support given to her. A mother's love is deep. However, there are limits when one is betrayed by the one she loved and trusted the most. A daughter comes to her mother for support when she is pregnant. The mother says without hesitation, it will be okay. And it was, but then the lies and betrayal began. First, it seemed harmless. Ah, love is blind. A mother will look for the good in her child and give them a chance to change. This mother gave chance after chance for her daughter to change, but instead, more lies and more betrayal. What does the mother get for giving her daughter all of these chances? A broken heart. The daughter who stole money, leaves without warning, and does not let her mother now speak to the baby that her mother raised, fed, clothed, sheltered, paid her medical bills, etc. Instead, she tells friends that her mother is controlling her life and she needs her space. No money, no future. Where did she go? Who is now watching out for the little angel? End quote. When Casey saw her mom's post, she called Jesse Grunn. She told him that something is going on with her family and that if Cindy contacted him, he should say nothing and let her handle it. Jesse was confused by this call. He didn't know what he was not supposed to say. On July 4th, Casey called Jesse and asked what he was doing. He said he was spending the day with family. He asked her what she had been talking about the day before. Casey said she didn't want to talk about it right then. She said she would tell him later when she was drunk. That night, Casey and her friends were going to Thornton Park to Will Waters' house to party. Casey and Amy went at 3:30 to help decorate. Caylee, once again, was nowhere to be found that day. She isn't even mentioned until Casey is drunk and she says to Will, "You know I have a daughter, right?" She told him that Caylee was at SeaWorld with Zanny the nanny. Cindy messaged Casey during the day on the 4th. She asked Casey if she and Caylee would come to watch fireworks with them as a family. She told her no. She said that they were out of town with Jeff Hopkins and were making their own little family. That night at 9 p.m., Casey went with her group of friends to Lake Eola to watch fireworks. She talked to Tony on the phone that night. He told her he didn't know when or if he would be returning to Florida. His dad was trying to get him to stay in New York. Casey's response was, quote, "I don't want to talk about this now. It's not a good time to be talking about negative things while watching fireworks," end quote. Casey never wanted to talk about negative things. She avoided it at all costs. Casey stayed at Will's that night. She cleaned his house for him while everyone else was outside playing football. This made Will take an interest in her. He said she had good energy. Amy had told Will that Casey had a boyfriend, but it seemed not to matter to him. On July 5th, Will and Casey spent the day together. They went for coffee, they went out to eat, and went to the IKEA store. While they were out and about, she told Will that she and Caylee were moving in with Amy. She said she paid so much for Caylee to have a nanny, it would make more sense to have a friend live with her to help out with Caylee. It seemed like Casey was trying to line up another boyfriend just in case Tony decided not to come back from New York. And why was Casey going so in depth with her lies? This whole month, she has told multiple people that Caylee was with the nanny. People who didn't even ask her, she just volunteered the information. It was like she was trying to set up the plot for what she was eventually going to tell people when everything was blown wide open, and eventually it would be. Tony called Casey later on the 5th, and said he was coming back that night. She left Will's house, went and washed Tony's Jeep, and then went and picked him up from the airport. The whole time she was on the phone with Will. That night, Tony said he woke up to find Casey in the living room watching a video of Caylee and crying. After that night, he said she would get nightmares quite often. Was she starting to feel guilty because she had been talking about Caylee so much the last few days? Or did she know that the walls were slowly closing in on her? On July 6th, Cindy once again asked Casey to bring Caylee over. Casey told her they were still with Jeff Hopkins. She told her mom he had taken her car to get an oil change and a tire rotation. Cindy had no clue at that time that the car was sitting on an impound lot. Cindy had told her mom about not seeing Casey and Caylee for a couple of weeks. This is the email Cindy's mom wrote to her sister, Mary Lou. Quote, "I can't believe that, Casey. I wonder what she is up to. Why would she be anywhere other than Orlando? Does Universal have theme parks in those other cities? Or is she just out gadding about? And is she taking the baby with her? Or is a setter taking care of Caylee? Who knows what she is doing? I can imagine Cindy is beside herself with worry." End quote. On July 8th, Casey's friends were leaving for Puerto Rico. Casey told Amy they needed her at work, so she couldn't go with them. But in a couple of days, she would fly down herself and catch up with them. Casey had no money and no intention of ever going with them, even though she had them believing she was going up to the moment they got on the plane. The good friend that Casey was, she offered to drive Amy to the airport at 6 a.m. that morning. In Amy's car, of course, since Casey had ditched hers. She even had Amy stop and fill it up with gas so that Casey could drive it while they were gone. Tony was back, so she couldn't drive his Jeep anymore. At 9:30 a.m., Casey texted Amy telling her how much she missed her already, and that as soon as she could get away from work, she was going to catch a flight to Puerto Rico and meet up with them for a couple of days. At the same time she is sending this message to Amy, Casey is at Target going on a shopping spree. How is this possible when you have no money and no job, you might ask? It's easy. You just steal your friend's checkbook out of the glove box of her car that she trusted you with while she's on vacation. At noon, Caylee spent $111 at Target on random stuff, such as yogurt, cherries, straws, Eggo waffles, spaghetti, lotion, and paper towels. On July 10th, Caylee went shopping on Amy's dime again. This time, she spent $137 on clothing. On that same day, she went to a different Target and bought some more food. She bought more cherries, more straws, OJ bread, Bud Light, and Sudafed, and spent $155. She spoke with Cindy briefly that day and told her that she was still out of town with Jeff Hopkins. She said they were getting ready to go out to dinner and she would be back in town on the 12th. On July 11th, she sent Amy a message and told her she didn't think she was going to make it to Puerto Rico. She said there was a lot going on at work and they needed her there to keep things running smoothly. On that day, Will Waters, the one she spent the 4th and the 5th with, while Tony was in New York, planned a special day for him and Caylee. He planned on taking her on a helicopter ride. He told her in advance when and where to meet. When the day came, however, Caylee was nowhere to be found. She wouldn't answer his calls or his texts. She finally responded hours after the time of the reservation. She said, quote, "Sorry, can't make it," end quote. Apparently, since Tony was back, Caylee had no use for Will. Also on the 11th, Simon Birch, the manager at Johnson's Wrecker Service, inspected Caylee's car and had a note put on the Anthony's door letting them know they had a certified letter to pick up at the post office. The letter said Caylee's car had been towed from an Amscott parking lot and was now on their impound lot. On July 12th, Caylee went shopping once again with Amy's checkbook. She spent $100 at Winn-Dixie. She had told Cindy that today would be the day her and Caylee would be returning home to Orlando. Cindy was waiting impatiently to see her grandbaby, whom she hadn't seen for almost a month at this point. Her heart sank when she got the call from Caylee saying once again they weren't coming back because Jeff's mom decided at the last minute to get married to her boyfriend, so they were going to stay in Jacksonville for that. On the 13th, George found the note on his door about the car, but didn't have time to go to the post office until a couple of days later on the 15th. George and Cindy got the letter from the post office and went to the impound yard. Simon walked George to the car. Before George could even open the door on the car, he smelled a horribly foul smell. Simon said he recognized the smell from when a man had killed himself and he was in the vehicle for 5 days before being found. It was the smell of human decomposition. He said Caylee's car had that same smell. Caylee's backpack, doll, and car seat were in the back seat of the car. In the trunk, there was a bag of trash and a pizza box with maggots all over it. George drove the car home and pulled it into the garage. Cindy came out and her first words were, "What died in here?" The last thing Caylee told them was Jeff was getting the car fixed, but it had been an impound this whole time. Also, Cindy, being a nurse, recognized the smell coming from the car. She had smelled it before when they took a tour of the morgue in nursing school. George and Cindy both left and went to work that day. George didn't want to go. He wanted to find Caylee and figure out what was going on. But Cindy told George she would take care of it. When Cindy got to work, she told her co-workers what had just transpired at home. Her supervisor told her to take the rest of the day off and handle her family matters. When Cindy got home, she started going through Caylee's car to look for clues as to what the hell was going on and where Caylee was even at. She found Amy Huizinga's number and gave her a call. She told her everything she knew and everything Caylee had been telling her. She asked Amy if she knew where Caylee had been staying, and Amy told her yes. Cindy drove Caylee's car to go pick up Amy and show her where Tony lived. When Amy got in the car, she about passed out from the smell. On the way to Tony's, Cindy told Amy about Casey stealing from everyone. When they got to Tony's, Amy knocked on the door and Cindy hid around the corner. When Casey opened the door, Cindy came out and demanded to see Caylee. Casey said, quote, "You don't need to see her. She is fine. We need space from you." The whole time, Tony was inside minding his business and playing video games. Cindy told Casey to get her things and that they were leaving. Cindy said to Tony, quote, "I hope you're rich because Casey is going to take all your money and leave you high and dry." Casey told her mom to shut up and they both stormed out. They left Tony's apartment and were quiet as Cindy drove to drop Amy off. Amy had been thinking about what Cindy said, and it reminded her of a time when she lost $400. She asked Casey if she knew where it was, and Casey said, "No, but I saw you sleepwalking with money in your hand, and you were also sleep talking and said you were going to put it in a safe place." Amy had never found the money, and now she's pretty sure it was Casey who took it. The first thing Amy did when she got home was checked her bank account. Her heart sank when she realized Casey had drained her accounts dry. We're going to end it here, and in the next episode, we will talk about Cindy's confrontation with Casey, Casey's arrest, and the wild goose chase she sent the police on. For pictures from this episode or to request a case, you can check out my Facebook page, After Dark, a true crime podcast. Be safe till next week. Bye, guys.